You're listening to the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram.
So Daryl, let's get straight into it. So let's go back to growing up in Adelaide. What are your earliest memories of cricket, Daryl?
Well, I do remember being attracted to Adelaide Oval fairly early on. As a primary school student, we'd head in after school occasionally and watch the end of a Shield game. I grew up in the eastern suburbs, and my nearest club was actually Kensington. I thought my nearest club was Kensington, which is where Sir Donald Bradman had played, but I later discovered I was attached to East Torrens by zone. Now, East Torrens was the club of Les Favell, and they played their games on Norwood Oval, which is a very well-known venue in Adelaide, where the mighty Redlegs play their football as well, and where night baseball used to be played in Adelaide in the 60s. So Norwood Oval is my ancestral home, if you like. I also had a relative who had umpired some Test cricket. Mel McGuinness had umpired 16 Tests in the 50s, and I always liked to wander over and listen to some of his stories when we had family functions, weddings, receptions, etc. And I always thought it'd be interesting to try and umpire, but at the age of 10, 11, 12, it wasn't something I really took seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. So who were some of your cricketing idols growing up, Daryl?
Oh, well, Les Favell for sure. He was the local hero. Whether it was the first ball or the last ball, if the ball was short, he'd have a crack at it. He was very exciting to watch. At that time, Barry Jarman was the South Australian wicketkeeper, and Gary Sobers came and played for South Australia in 63-4, and they won the Sheffield Shield. And there were other great players at the time, people like Ken Cunningham, who played on an Australian second tour to New Zealand in 64. Alan Frost was actually my Sunday school teacher, and he was the opening bowler for South Australia, and he started his first-class career by having Geoffrey Boycott caught Jarman, bowled Frost, no score on the first ball of a tour match when South Australia played England. So, yeah, they were the people that I admired at the time. Bobby Simpson nationally was heavily involved, and my first cricket bat was a Bobby Simpson Slazenger 5-star. And, I got quite a few edges with that. That served me well. But not too many marks down the middle, though.
Yeah, bit of French cricket there. Yeah. So you mentioned umpiring, Daryl. Why did you go into umpiring, Daryl? Why was it about umpiring that made you go towards that path in cricket?
I played for my club, East Torrens, in 2 January underage carnivals, under 16, under 17 carnivals. And the following January, I found myself preparing to go to Teachers College with nothing to do. And I heard they were looking for umpires, and I thought I'd just give it a try. So for the next 2 Januaries, I umpired lads that I'd played against in previous years. They were either 1 year behind me or 2 years behind me, and thoroughly enjoyed myself. I then became a primary teacher, taught in the country, and in country cricket, there aren't too many umpires. So when your team is batting, someone's got to umpire, and none of my teammates wanted to do it. So I would always volunteer. If I wasn't batting, I'd be out there umpiring. And it just one thing led to another. I enjoyed it so much that at the age of 31, I thought I'd try and do it semi-seriously as a bit of a weekend hobby. And it got out of control.
Yeah, I can sort of relate to that, being in the country as well. Being an umpire here, young umpire, not many umpires, and the team has to fill in when you only got one umpire and someone has to do something at square leg. So, we need more umpires, I say.
We do, definitely.
Absolutely. Without a game of cricket, you can't have a game of cricket without umpires.
Exactly. Like the one behind me on the wall.
Yeah. So, Daryl, after umpiring some years in domestic cricket, you finally got the call up to umpire international matches of cricket in 1994. Who told you the news that you were becoming an international umpire?
That's a good question. I think it probably would have been Tony Crafter. Tony is a South Australian, and he'd moved across after his Test umpiring career finished. He moved to Melbourne, joined the Australian Cricket Board as the umpires manager, and I'm sure it would have been Tony who gave me the call and told me that, I was about to do my first ODI. Unfortunately, that game got washed out. That was to be played at Adelaide Oval in December 93. It was a total washout. I had to wait another 2 or 3 weeks and move into January 94 and go to Perth, where I umpired South Africa and New Zealand in my first game, my first ODI.
Yes, you mentioned that. We're going to talk about that ODI debut between South Africa and New Zealand in 1994 at Perth. It was a tri-series that involved South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia. And Australia won the tri-series, beating South Africa 2-1 in the 3-match final series in that tri-series in the end. What are your memories from that day, Daryl?
Well, I can remember taking the first over at the WACA. I remember which end I was at. I was facing the Prindeville end. I was facing the members' end at that stage for the redevelopment. And Alan Donald took the ball for South Africa and charged in. And I remember pinching myself, wondering what the heck I was doing in that situation under all that pressure, because Alan Donald was just a wonderful fast bowler, just very quick, very pleasant to deal with, to talk to, and those balls were thundering down quicker than any I'd seen before. And I think the third or fourth ball, he managed to clatter one into the pads of Andrew Jones, and I gave him out LBW, and I had my first dismissal in my first over of one-day international cricket. I was up and away, and loved it. Loved the pressure, loved the excitement, loved being there amongst the best players in the world, and just thrived on it.
Absolutely. So then 4 years later, after your ODI debut, you umpired your first Test match, which was back in Perth again, this time in the Ashes between Australia and England. What are your memories from that day, and what was it like umpiring an Ashes Test?
It was extraordinary, actually. To get a Test in the first place was pretty exciting, but for it to be an Ashes Test was unbelievable. My second was also an Ashes Test. That was the fourth Test in Melbourne, but the first one, it was probably the second Test in the series. I think they would have played in Brisbane, came to Perth, and I'd been given very good preparation. In the month of November of that year, I'd actually been to Perth twice. I'd been across to umpire Western Australia playing England in the tour game, the 4-day game, came home to Adelaide, went back a week later and umpired a Shield game between Western Australia and Victoria, came home and went back for the last week of November for the Test. So I was quite familiar with the surroundings and knew the ins and outs of the place. I knew about the bounce of the pitch. I knew what to expect, basically. And Australia ran through England pretty quickly, and it was all over in 2.5 days. It was quite disappointing, actually, that it finished so quickly. But number one Test, and Australia had cleaned out England, and I'm not sure what the score was in the series. I never worried too much about those scores, but I just knew that one Test up, and I look forward to doing the Boxing Day Test.
Yes, you mentioned Boxing Day. That was an epic game. England won by 12 runs. Dean Headley took 6 wickets in the second innings, and England bowled Australia out for 162, chasing 175. One of the rarest wins that England had in that time against Australia.
Yep.
And you also did another Ashes Test, but this time as a TV umpire. That was back in 2002-3, and back in Perth again. You were third umpire for that Test match of that series, which Australia won, obviously.
Against New Zealand?
No, against Australia. England.
That was an Ashes one, was it?
That was an Ashes one.
I cannot recall doing that at all. But there, I'll take your word for it.
Well, it says you do. It said you were third umpire for that match, so I'm going to believe what ESPN say on that.
So be it. I did umpire 832 games of cricket, so my memory's not that clear on them all.
Yeah.
I do recall being a third umpire in Perth in a Australia-New Zealand game. So I think I might have done 10 tests as third umpire, but I must admit I don't value those as highly as the 95 I did on the ground. They're the real tests.
Absolutely. Then you made your T20 debut, Daryl, in 2007. It was during the World Cup in South Africa, the first one, and it was at Johannesburg between South Africa and the West Indies. You umpired a few seasons in the IPL in the early years, Daryl, and you had a bit of experience about what T20 cricket was all about. Daryl, what was it like umpiring T20 cricket, this new weird and wacky format? And what was it like umpiring in the first ever T20 World Cup in South Africa?
Oh, well, I love the T20s. I love the test matches. I love the T20s. A lot of action, a lot of fun. It all happens so quickly. It's very entertaining for the crowd. The numbers came in. We had big attendances wherever we went. The first IPL was in India, of course, in 2008. The second one was transferred to South Africa because of security concerns in 2009 at the last minute, and then back in India for 2010. So they were my 3 IPLs. Yeah, they were a lot of fun. A lot of fun. There were just a lot of noise. Umpiring in India is always a challenge. I discovered that way back in 1999 when I first went over for about my 4th test. It was a test in India, in Kanpur. So I knew what to expect. Very challenging. Not only the heat and the of those sort of conditions, but just the intensity of the place and the sense of importance that a game carries. Knowing that so many people, love their cricket, live for their cricket. We think we're fanatics in Australia, but we don't compare to India. Indians are fanatics. Loved it.
Yeah.
Loved it.
They just worship their players
They
like
do.
gods, really.
Oh, even higher. I missed out on a lot of the T20s because I guess that was just in its infancy when I departed. I think I did only 10 T20 international matches, and I'm not sure if the last one was, but I did umpire the final at Lord's in 2008 when Pakistan played and beat Sri Lanka, I believe. That was pretty exciting because we had an all-Australian trio of umpires involved in that game. So the only reason we could do that was because Australia didn't make the final. So that was always a bonus. If Australia didn't go well, then we had a chance to umpire further into the tournaments.
Absolutely, because obviously you can't umpire your home country, obviously, because of that conflict with bias and all that stuff. So in 2002, Daryl, you were promoted to the ICC Elite Panel, this newly created panel by the ICC. In April 2002, the ICC changed the way the game was being officiated by creating the ICC Umpires Elite Panel by having neutral umpires umpiring games, whereas before you had one home and one away umpire in all international matches. This was to take the bias issue out of the game. We had a few complaints by the players with that. And on average, the panel will probably do 8 to 10 test matches and 10 to 15 ODIs, plus any world events that the ICC have in a year, a potential workload of around about 75 days on the field, plus travel and preparation time per year. The panel is reviewed every year by the ICC, and these selected officials are contracted to work for the ICC on a full-time basis in a program shared with their home boards. And 2 umpires from the elite panel will stand in almost all test matches around the world, while 1 member stands with a home umpire from the international panel of ICC umpires. That will usually happen in a normal, typical, busy cricket season. With this current situation at the moment, Daryl, we've sort of reverted back to the old system where we've had all home umpires now because there's no travel on at the moment. Now, for those who don't know what the ICC International Panel of Umpires is, it's pretty much the panel below the elite panel.
Sure.
And comprises of 4 umpires selected by each ICC member country to do ODIs and T20s at home when the elite panel umpires can't do those games or fill in for the odd test match every now and again. Daryl, you were a part of the original 8-member panel, which included yourself, Steve Buckner, Ahsoka De Silva, Van Cad, Rudy Kurtzen, Dave Orchard, David Shepherd, and Russell Tiffin. Peter Willey was invited to be on the panel, but he declined due to him requiring too much time away from his family. So he would have been on that panel, but he declined to go on that panel. Daryl, what was it like being promoted to this new panel and being considered as one of the best umpires in the world. How did you feel about that?
It was very exciting. I mean, I'd been umpiring for Cricket Australia, or the Australian Cricket Board at the time, from on a contract from about 1997 to 2002, and that involved, busy workload at home. So all of a sudden, to go to South Africa for a conference with about 5 referees and 8 or 7 other umpires, and get briefed about how things were going to work was incredibly exciting, probably one of the more exciting moments of my life. We came away from a 2 or 3 day conference with our first assignments, and there was a lot of chatter, a lot of talk, a lot of thought. I actually headed to the West Indies with Asoka De Silva and with Ranjan Madigali as our referee. And I believe we had 3 test matches in the Caribbean with India on tour. For the first time, so Asoka and I did all 3 games, and the locals did the 3rd umpire role. And it was, I can't describe how exciting it was, because traveling around the world, different countries, different cultures. The good part about it was I'd seen most of the players somewhere else. They'd usually been to Australia before then. So I think I'd umpired 16 tests around the world, including 7 in Australia, by the time that elite panel was named in 2002. So I'd had a little bit of a taste of the travel, but this was going to be more time away from home, and possibly 8 months travelling on the road out of 12 was a fair commitment, but I was supported by my family, and I loved it. Enjoyed it. In fact, from those original 8, I think I was the last of the original 8 to leave the panel. David Shepherd retired, and pretty much everyone else got the sack, including myself.
Yeah, pretty much. The ICC just said you're all sacked. Goodbye.
Yeah. One at a time.
One at a time, of course, not at once, obviously.
Yeah.
So, Daryl, you've worked with a lot of world-class umpires over your years at being an international umpire. David Shepherd, you just mentioned, Simon Taufel, Van Cad, Rudy Kutsen, etc. Daryl, who were your mentors in your umpiring career? And Daryl, who were some of your favourite umpires to work with during your time as an international umpire?
Well, Tony Crafter was our local hero, if you like, in Adelaide. So I did a lot of my early games with Tony. In fact, the 3rd day I ever pulled on my umpiring gear, I was umpiring with Tony Crafter in a C-grade fixture here in Adelaide. He was rotated down to umpire with the new bloke, and he must have given me a favourable report, because I then quickly went to B grade, then up to A grade, and started doing the Shield cricket. So yeah, thanks to Tony for that. He got me started well. When I got to the elite panel, I must admit, people like David Shepherd, far and away my favourite partner. Just a charming, lovely man. Everyone loved him. Players, the coaches, the crowd, the umpires. He wouldn't have had an enemy in the world. Just a superb person. Some of the umpires weren't as cooperative and easy to work with as you may imagine. Unfortunately, in my first test match, my partner was extremely poor at doing the basics. And after I'd been umpiring for 15 years, I just expected that my partner would automatically be giving me a signal of 2 balls to go in the over. Aside from all the other signalling we do, whether the balls come off the body or the bat, whether it's missed everything, all sorts of other body language you get from your partner. But my partner in my very first test was Srinivasa Raghavan, Venkata, and he could not manage to give me the signal of 2 to go in the over. And unfortunately, he wanted it from me when he was at the bowler's end, but he seemed to drift off into another world when he went to square leg. So I found that very disconcerting for a young umpire. Well, I say young, for an umpire coming into his first test match. You like to have your rituals and your habits, and that was one. Signalling 2 to go it's just basic. I mean, people do it at all forms of cricket. It's not difficult to do, but unfortunately it was for my partner at the time. So that was a very unsettling moment. Look, to be honest, I enjoyed umpiring with all those names you mentioned. Steve Bucknell was wonderful. I had him in my second test match, my incredible test match at Melbourne, where Australia went down in a very strange day, on the fourth day of the match, I believe we actually played the longest session in Test cricket ever. It went for over 4 hours, and it resulted in Australia finally losing the wickets. Basically, we'd lost the first day with rain. We were making up time every day. So it was an extended day with an early start. We took tea early when England was dismissed in the second innings. Took tea early, so we commenced the Australian second innings soon after. And after 3.5 hours, Steve Waugh opted to bat on for half an hour to try and get a result. He was one of the two captains. That was his prerogative. If he thought, if he requested it, we're obliged to allow it to happen. Alex Stewart, the England captain, was pretty disappointed because he'd had his men in the field for 3.5 hours, and it was a lot to ask the bowlers to keep coming back. And 20 minutes later, I think he was quite happy because the last 3 Australian wickets fell in quick succession, and England won the Test. Very exciting time.
Absolutely. It was a very exciting Test match.
Wonderful.
One of the best in Ashes cricket, certainly up there. Now, Daryl, over your international umpiring career, you have umpired some of the best players in the world, umpired at most iconic grounds in world cricket, umpired some of the best teams in world cricket, and umpired in some memorable games in cricket history. Daryl, if you had to choose your favourite ground, favourite team or teams, favourite players, and the most memorable match you've umpired in, what will they be?
Okay, that's we got half an hour here. First of all, my favourite ground would definitely be home here in Adelaide.
Of course, yeah.
It's just a magnificent venue, and it's even better today since it's been redeveloped. I know a lot of the umpires on the national panel here in Australia all rate it as their favourite venue, and none of those people come from South Australia. They all rate it as just a lovely venue, and kept the history, and they've modernised in accordance with time. So yeah, Adelaide would be one of my favourite venue. But of course, I did umpire one Test match here. That was quite a memorable one. But most of my cricket was umpired overseas. So I'd have to go to Sri Lanka, I think, for my favourite overseas venue, and that would be Galle in the southern tip of Sri Lanka, where I umpired 7 Test matches, all obviously involving Sri Lanka, and I think all involving Murali. One of them was actually Murali's final Test match. He needed to take 7 wickets in the Test to reach 800 wickets, and I think he was a couple short after the first innings. He might have taken a 4 for or a 5 for, and it really boiled down to on the last day of the match, he needed to take the last wicket to secure his 800th Test wicket, and he determined that he was only going to play that first Test in the series, and that's all he did. And fortunately, there was a nick to the keeper, nick to first slip, and Ojar from India edged the ball to Mahela Jayawardena, and that was Murali's 800th wicket, and they all walked off with Sri Lanka perhaps needing about 70 runs to win, which they knocked up in quick time. So yeah, the Galle Stadium is magnificent. It's got a beautiful fortress on the corner built by the Dutch Portuguese invaders in the 16th century. It's quite iconic. If you go to Galle, you must visit the fortress. Sadly, either side of my Test matches, or so I should say in the middle of all those Test matches, there was a terrible event when the tsunami swept through, and goodness knows how many lives were lost. And certainly hundreds of thousands of lives were lost along that coast. And there's a marvellous statue outside the ground now showing just how high that water was as it swept through and completely engulfed the stadium. People in the fortress, I believe, were quite safe because the tsunami swept past on 2 sides of the fortress, and the only entry to the fortress is actually on the land side. So there was very little water that managed to get in and damage. So lives were quite safe in there. So the resilience of the people in that area always impressed me. When I went back after the tsunami and they'd picked themselves up off the floor and were mounting a cricket campaign again, I couldn't believe how strong and determined they were. an amazing venue, and certainly my favourite, especially going back there for 7 Test matches.
Absolutely. Do you have any favourite teams or teams that you've umpired, or most memorable matches that you remember?
I can't say that I have any favourite teams because, cricket is a team game and the teams go out there to perform to the best of their ability. It's the individuals, I suppose, that you have your conversations with. On every team, there'll be people that don't like to talk on the field. Some, like to remain focused throughout, or some maybe just don't like me. And there'll also be, on most teams, there's usually someone that's a bit of a chatterbox, which I'd class myself as. And so we'd have a few yarns standing out at square leg or between overs. There are always some nice guys. To name a few, I was always impressed with, for example, Graham Smith from South Africa, who came into the captaincy at a very early age. And Graham was a charming lad, a lot of responsibility, took it on his shoulders, and I umpired him a number of Test matches. And I was always impressed by his strength of personality as well as his batting skill. And yes, Graham and I had many a conversation about things that were not involving cricket. He's one personality that stood out well. I could probably select any team. I could go to, for example, the Indian team. There was a lovely left-arm medium pace opening bowler, Irfan Pathan, who he and I spoke on many occasions. In fact, I do recall a conversation a long way back where he asked me about my family, and it transpired that at the time I had a daughter who was about his age and was also single, as he was. So for the next 5 years, whenever we came across each other, the first question would be, "Are you still single?" And his first question would be, "Is your daughter still single?" So I always thought that that might be a good superannuation plan if I could get those two together. But unfortunately, it never eventuated. They did meet each other once, and I think they were both highly embarrassed after that story had been going on for years. So, which you name a team, and I'll tell you there are marvellous characters on every team.
Absolutely. Too many to list.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Daryl, you retired from international umpiring in 2011. As we said before, the ICC gave you your marching orders and told you were gone. You were the last of the original 8-member panel to retire, as you mentioned before. Your last ODI was Bangladesh and South Africa in Dhaka in 2011. Your last Test match was the West Indies and India 2011, which was Virat Kohli's first Test match. He was on debut in that match. And your last T20 national, I think you mentioned it before, Sri Lanka and Pakistan at Lords in 2009 T20 World Cup. Yeah. Reflecting on your career, Daryl, all good things come to an end. When you reflect on your international umpiring career, what are you most proud of? And do you have any regrets?
Well, the second part first, I don't have any regrets. I don't have any regrets. I loved every moment of it. I enjoyed the challenge of getting out there in front of billions of people on the television audiences and generally getting, doing the job to the best of my ability and getting decisions right. It didn't always happen. So as a human, I knew there would be moments that I might have regretted. There'll certainly be many moments where I would have liked to have gone back and changed a decision, but in most of my career was involved without the DRS. It was the DRS coming in the last 2 or 3 years that changed the game somewhat. I had to operate without the DRS, so if I made a decision, that decision stood. Of course, these days, if there's a problem with the decision, it can be reviewed and overturned, and the players move on, the game moves on. But old-style cricket, as I often refer to it, you accept the umpire's decision, whether it's right or wrong. I must be honest and say that as a player, I was not always the most pleasant person if I got a bad decision. So I did understand what it was like to get a crook decision. Yes, I had a bit of a fiery side to me in that respect, but the umpire's out there to do his job, and if he gets it right, so be it. If he gets it wrong, well, all hell can break loose. But it's just a matter of realising it's only a game, and keeping it in perspective, there are a lot more serious things happening in the world than getting an LBW wrong. However, these days, the DRS seems to be, coping pretty well with the challenges of modern day cricket, and the umpires have adapted to it. I was actually involved in one of the trials that wasn't as successful as it could have been, and that was in the Caribbean in about 2008 when England toured, and the format had not been very, very well thought out, because as a third umpire, if an LBW decision was reviewed, we were only able to watch the replay until the ball struck the pad or the body, wherever. We were not given the ability to see the predicted path of the ball, which is now just commonplace. So we had to make a decision. We had to advise the on-field umpire whether we thought the ball was going to go on and hit the stumps. Now, that is not there is no foolproof method of doing that. We are only human, and it is only technology. It's only as good as the technology allowed. And there were occasions where our judgment was proven to be not as good as it could have been. If you can imagine a batsman being hit 5 feet from the stumps, or 1.5 meters from the stumps, and the ball close to the knee roll, it's often a lottery as to whether it was going to take a bail, flick a bail, miss completely, or hit 2 inches down from the top of the stump. So there were some unfortunate moments where batsmen were given out and probably shouldn't have been, and vice versa. So it was a trial. It was just poorly managed, unfortunately, and the umpires had to bear the brunt. And I was at the centre of a lot of that brunt, if you like. I copped a lot of flack from a number of people. I seem to recall that most of them were English, as it turns out. Yes, Bob Willis wasn't all that happy with a few of my decisions, and Nasser Hussain seemed to develop a bit of a dislike for some of my performances. I don't know whether it had anything to do with the fact that they lost the Under-19 World Cup semi-final in Adelaide when I was umpiring, and were put out of the tournament. I probably didn't come into it.
Hi everyone, hope you enjoyed hearing Daryl's umpiring journey. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast, and like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Also, the podcast is now available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.